I'm a big fan of also this era of music as well, the Sinatra
Hmm. Oh,
time. My personal favorite like singer from that time is Vera Lynn. She's
oh,
one of my
hmm.
favorites, but Sinatra's in close second because
Okay.
they always have like so many covers of the same songs. So I just go
Yeah.
between the renditions. Um, so you've had many productions hit the stage from Diana to Memphis, and I just
Hmm.
wanted to ask what it's like when one of your pieces debuts. Is it excitement? Are you nervous, or is there one feeling that dominates kind of more than the other?
Oh, I would, it probably goes in stages, but I
Yeah,
would say it's really all of those feelings,
yeah,
when I first, if I get this is one of those, I was hired to do this. This was a commission.
yeah,
So it was just total excitement about getting, to write about Frank Sinatra, write a bio musical about Frank
yeah.
Sinatra was just, when I first met Tina Sinatra, Frank's youngest offspring, I said to her, I told her, I said, my Italian American grandmother had two pictures cut out from Life magazine tacked on her kitchen wall, and that one was the Pope and the other was your father. So like I literally grew up with this music in my family,
Yeah,
and I knew what Sinatra meant to Italian American immigrants
yeah.
of that generation. So I was just like, please let me write a draft. I really
Yeah.
want to do this. So that, that part was pure excitement. And then, Tina's been remarkable because she's let us. Frank lived, as I'm sure you know, a very complicated life,
Yeah.
right? And I said, I immediately said to her, no one wants to see a watered down milk toast version of your dad. No one will believe it. No one wants to see that. I said, if we can tell the truth and really portray him as a complete, complex human, flaws, positive attributes, everything, and how he took his life and put it into his music, I said, I think we can make a really good show. And to her credit, she's like, absolutely. She goes, just tell the truth and keep it balanced. So I thought that was really good. So, so that was all excitement. And then it was hard work. And then when we get to go on stage, then it's half excitement and half nervousness that I wanted to do well by Tina. Because, as I tell
Yeah.
people, I essentially wrote a show about her beloved parents' divorce.
Yeah.
So, if you wrote a show about my parents, I'd be a little like, what are you
I'd be
doing?
a bit guarded. Yeah.
Yeah, right. And so she was a bit, but she's been great. So, and then it's I as a writer, I'm always thrilled to get my work up. I'm always thrilled to see it. I'm always thrilled when people respond so positively to it as they have been at the Old Witch Theater. But before, I will say, before every performance, even if it's a show that I wrote years ago and it's been playing all over the world, and I go to see a regional production, I still get that twinge of nervousness
Yeah.
that I think every creative person has of like,
Absolutely.
am I good enough?
Yeah. Yeah. And so on the point with Tina, I was actually going to
Yeah.
ask you anyway,
Yeah.
how did you kind of honor her image of her father while also protecting yourself from omitting his flaws? Obviously, you said Tina was very kind of let you do what you want, but was there anything she asked you not to include at all? Was she very kind of
She was very open about it. I mean, I think there were maybe um I think she just wanted it balanced because I think
Mm.
she's read scripts of various films and things in the past that were just all sensationalized.
Yeah,
There's been so much obviously written about Frank.
yeah,
So, the womenizing,
yeah,
he grew up in Hoboken, New Jersey and had friends in the mafia, like all of that stuff. He suffered from depression, I think, at some point. There were a couple of, suicide attempts. I don't know how serious they were. There were certainly cries for help. So he had, as I said, he experienced what people experience in life.
yeah,
So I think I told Tina, like, displaying this part of your dad will actually, people will be able to relate to him more,
mm,
because I think often with icons, you're like, they're ththese people who just must have
exactly.
started up high like
Yeah,
this, right? And I'm like, he was a human being and he had his struggles, and and the part of his life which we decided to focus on, between the mid 40s and early 50s, when he had that great comeback. He really went through it. He lost at one point, after the war ended. He left his wife for Ava Gardner because he was just madly in love with her, and that didn't work out. He lost
yeah,
his movie contract. He lost his record contract. He lost his career. So I said, everyone can relate to those ups and
yeah,
downs. So she was very, as she said, as long as it's balanced, um, as long as we understand him on all levels, she sort of gave me carte blanche. There was very few things that she pushed back on.
So were there, because I read online that you used her as your primary source before kind of going to any other accounts.
Yeah.
So were there any contradictions in her accounts with maybe some official sources?
Not so much with her account. So yeah, because I happened to be working on a show at Diana on La Jolla Playhouse, which is in Southern California. She lives in LA.
Mm.
So when I got the call, so on my it was crazy schedule. On my Monday, my one day off, we're working on a big new musical. I would drive the 3 hours up the California
Oh my
highway,
God.
which is all traffic. And I would sit in Tina's den, surrounded by all these books about her family and her father and all these amazing mementos. And she would and I'd ask, so what happened with this? What happened with that? And, obviously she was a child when all this was happening,
Yeah,
right? So
yeah,
she didn't, all of her experiences, are something that her, I mean, my parents never talked to me about their
yeah,
personal lives,
yeah,
So all of these were either experience she had as a child. Obviously, her father was a very public figure, so she read about them
mm,
and did have conversations with him about them. But how much a father tells his daughter, it's not, so it's not exactly, I think, a open flowing conversation. But she didn't really have contradictions with me. She told me a couple things about me about them that were really interesting that never had been reported. Like one of them, which is in the show, is she said, when my father went to Hollywood, my mother put condoms in his luggage because and she said, don't do anything stupid
oh wow,
because she knew like these were young, beautiful people who were,
yeah,
all of them were they were all sleeping
wow,
with each other, like
that's
I'm sure
crazy.
today.
Yeah,
And she knew it was going to happen. It was at the time when women were taught to look the other way, be a
yeah,
good wife, look the other way. It was a different time. And I was like, oh my God, that tells so much about the father and the mother. So like that one in the show, but and that's nowhere else. No one else knows about that. But the contradictions I found were in the books about him because there's so much written about him.
yeah,
Some is, and I read there were some primary ones I thought were really well researched. There were a couple of written of people who knew him, like they were in the 1970s, that were really helpful because they were not seen through our modern eyes. They were seen through
yeah,
older eyes and what they knew about him and that. So that was really interesting.
mm,
But the contradictions were in the book, and some were just I don't know, scandal sheets and just so some outrageous. So you basically at the end of the day have to pick what feels like the story we want to tell,
yeah,
and also what feels the most truthful,
yeah,
because
yeah,
I wanted to really portray a man's life and it's also about him, and it's about the three very strong women in his life at this time,
yeah.
which was his wife Nancy, Ava Gardner, his second wife, and his mother Dolly, who was an amazing woman and a strong Italian woman who I grew up with, surrounded by many of those types of ladies, and her influence on his life too.
Obviously you have that personal tie with the kind of similar heritage to
Yeah.
Frank, like you just mentioned. So does that did that at all make it hard to depict his flaws?
Yeah, no, it made it easier actually. Like
Yeah,
I just like he was an Italian guy and grew up in an
yeah, yeah,
very Italian family. I lived, he grew up in Hoboken. I after
mm.
college moved to Hoboken.
Oh yeah,
Um, yeah, and I remember when I was looking for an apartment. This was many years ago. There was this. You sort of, I was looking for like an apartment, and they're all brownstones there. And there are a lot of young people at the time who were working in New York City, moving there. And I thought Hoboken would be great. I'm Italian. And
mm.
I remember going to places and an Italian family would own the brownstone, and people would
Yeah,
tell me, if you book a room here, I have to say, my grandmother, she's always looking out the window, making sure everything's okay. And I was like, because I was Italian, I'm like, I don't want that. I was, 23. I wanted total freedom. So, yeah, so I lived there. And oddly, when I was a toddler, I lived in Hasbrook Heights,
mm.
which is a tiny town in New Jersey, which is where Frank and Nancy lived
Oh
when they were
wow,
starting before they moved to Hollywood. So
yeah,
and in some ways, I wrote I wrote Tina's grandparents, Frank's mom and dad in the show, but in some ways they're mine.
mm.
I knew how they spoke.
Mm.
Like my grandmother, this was in the 1970s, would always refer to her refrigerator as my ice box, even though it hadn't been an ice box for 40 years probably. So so that kind of language is like naturally in the show, and I wrote it. I didn't even realize it till I was watching the show, and I'm like, oh yeah, I didn't even consciously think about that. That's of course that's how that woman would refer to her appliance.
Through your like family, you have the unique insight into how that dynamic might have been as well.
Yeah, I told Tina, I won't I'll have to research your dad. I wouldn't have to do any research about what it's like to be an Italian American of that era. Yeah.
Yeah, you mentioned that the period covers the comeback of Sinatra between like the
Mhm.
40s and 50s, and he has, his career, he loses his record deal. I think he loses his voice at one point. I don't know if you include that
Yeah.
in the production, but what specifically about that period attracted you then, rather than say the Rat Pack days or perhaps the Reagan era Sinatra later on?
Yeah, I just felt I didn't know that era very well.
Mhm.
Like I didn't know the comeback story. I knew that I'm a big old movie buff, so I knew when he won the Oscar for From
Yeah.
Here to Eternity. Spoiler for anyone who sees the show. I don't think a lot of people know that. That, but that was also married to he met around the same time the great arranger Nelson Riddle.
Mm.
So those two events, meeting Nelson Riddle and starting those new albums, and the Oscar really went from he was a has-been really
Yeah, yeah,
to suddenly the biggest star in the world, and then he became, the super. I call this show I call it the origin story of Frank Sinatra.
yeah,
It's like in superhero movies, how this is how so and so got their superpowers. This show is
yeah,
about how Sinatra got his superpowers, which I just thought was a great term. We didn't want to cover too much because, as Kathleen Marshall and I say, we could do 4 musicals about his life.
yeah,
I mean, the Rat Pack is its own thing. His later years are complicated, and I think we were, I was just very attracted to like younger Frank.
mm,
It's a musical, so I thought,
mm,
oh, getting a younger person to play Frank
yeah, yeah,
is. I didn't want to do some biopics do or biomusicals do, three people at 3 different
yeah,
stages of
yeah,
life, and I was like, there's so much about Frank in this period. I could write a mini series about this period. So let me
yeah,
see if I can make it a musical. It just seemed like the juiciest part of his life, and I liked the fact that he was both looking through a modern lens. We would label a lot of his personal choices controversial, or
yeah,
even
yeah,
as a dramatist, I really tried to explore that and
yeah,
what it meant. And you have to see him through the lens of the 1940s and early 50s, which was a
yeah.
very different time. Yeah, so I just thought it was the most dramatic and potentially most interesting point of his life for a musical story.
And I suppose being an origin story as well in that period, it's kind of very friendly to people that don't know his life as well, rather than maybe the Rat Pack days might have been kind of jumping into the middle of his
Yeah,
life.
yeah, and I think the Rat Pack days, you get into more controversies. I think you get into
Yeah,
racial issues,
yeah,
and it's and I think if you say Rat Pack, people will expect a Vegas show. They'll
yeah,
expect 4 guys in tuxedos with boozy, and
yeah,
then and unpacking all that would be great, but I wouldn't be interested in just doing a
yeah,
review. And I think I want to say there's been reviews. I'm sure people have done reviews about here's Dean Martin,
yeah.
but and all 4 of their story. I mean, Sammy Davis, Dean Martin, Frank. All 3 of their stories are great. So yeah, so I just thought this one. And then he married Mia Farrow then, and she was 20 and he was 50. So you just have to
Yeah,
like it gets a little more complicated. I just
yeah,
thought he was complicated, but the times weren't. So I
yeah.
could put a complicated person in this really interesting story. Was why I chose that point.
And what do you think about Sinatra then? Because obviously he had this, you said yourself, he was a has-been for a while. So,
Yeah.
at the time, there were figures that were far bigger than him that now,
Oh,
and
yeah.
retrospectively, are nowhere near. So, why do you think he's more attractive to audiences rather than someone like Doris Day or Bing Crosby or, the other big figures from that time?
Yeah, I mean, Bing Crosby was the superstar, and
Right.
part of
Yeah.
the show is him trying to be bigger than Bing, which everyone thought, wasn't. But my that's a great question, and I asked myself that when I was first researching, and when I came upon this one fact, opened the door to me for Frank and why we listen to him today, and that is he from the first time he saw her in this like little Chicago supper club or joint sing, he wanted to emulate Billie Holiday
Mm.
because she put all of her emotion. She had a very complicated life, and obviously she was a black woman, so dealing with issues that were, much more difficult than Frank's.
Yeah.
She put all of the complications and all of her emotions and all of her heartache into her music.
Mm.
And Frank heard her and said, "That's what I want to do." And the reason that I think we can still listen to One for My Baby, and
Mm.
you listen to that song and you're like, the guy singing this didn't have to do research. The guy
No,
singing this
absolutely. Yeah,
like
yeah,
knew what it was like to be in a bar in the middle of the night
yeah,
because he's depressed. So I just think people can talk about phrasing and he has great taste and he had great taste in people to work with, but I actually think it's because he took the his true emotions that we all feel and he just shared them in his music. And Billie Holiday did the same thing.
yeah,
And unlike Bing Crosby, who was a great, pitch perfect singer, he was all sentiment. So he only listened to Bing Crosby at Christmas, right? Because
yeah,
that's where we want
yeah,
we only want sentiment at Christmas. We don't
yeah.
want complicated stories. And but Frank, you can listen to Frank anytime, and always amazed by how much young people still adore him.
Yeah.
And when I ask what their favorite Frank song is, sometimes they'll say songs I'm not that familiar with. I mean, he really does transcends generations, as does Billie Holiday.
So do you think that's the main reason he's kind of his legacy has lasted and is it, people like me and young people still love him?
I do. I think it's the emotional honesty of his performance, and he's not afraid to share the complications and the tragedies and the pain of his life.
So what are your
Yeah.
favorite Sinatra songs, just out of interest then?
Oh, I love One for My Baby, and
Yeah,
I knew it had to go in the show, and I was
yeah.
like, okay, it has to go in the second act, how do I get it in there? And like there's some songs where he just sings very it's just Frank singing in the Frank style
Mm.
we like, but there's some songs sung by other people. I'm like, oh, I sort of want to hear him sing this song, but it's a little on the nose to have Frank going through these troubles singing this, so I had to figure out that. But I think it's a great moment in the second act,
Yeah,
surprising moment. I mean, I love That's Life, which I also, as soon as I got the gig, like even when I hadn't laid out the full story, I'm like, all right, the end of the first act has to end with him singing That's Life,
yeah,
because you take your hero, and he's facing troubles at the end of Act One, and
yeah,
there's a bit of a cliffhanger. What's he going to do? And I'm like, that's the perfect song. And interestingly, Frank, for his solo records, once he left the bands, he had very few songs with backup singers, and
mm.
that's one of the few songs with backup singers.
No.
So I'm like, oh, that's going to be a really new sound at the end of the act that
Yeah,
we really haven't heard much of before. But there's some songs, and obviously there's, I don't know, what do you have, 40 classics, and they're like, the show could be 9 hours long if you wanted. But one song which I love, which I couldn't fit in, was Summer Wind.
yeah,
Uh, I just love it, and but it's like, but it's the songs are all integrated. The songs all mean something to the story.
yeah,
And Summer Wind is about a romance that came and went in the summer, which just
yeah,
didn't fit the story.
yeah.
So I couldn't fit that in. And there's a song I love called Cycles, which is not one of
I
his
don't know,
more
I
famous
don't know
one.
that
It's like
one.
from the seven. Listen to it. It's
I
it's
will, I'll
it's
write it
about
down.
yeah. Listen, Cycles. It's a little sentimental, but I love it so much. It's just very frank, and yeah,
Mm.
yeah, yeah. It was like an early '70s song in that era. Yeah, but there's another song I wanted to get in the show and I couldn't fit was High Hopes. I just think is great. I
Yeah,
love that.
yeah. I
When I was
think
a kid, I loved it. Yeah,
my
yeah.
favorites are Autumn Leaves. I love
Oh,
his cover of Autumn Leaves and Strangers in the Night. And
yeah.
everyone did this song then, from what I've seen. I'll Never Smile Again. That's one of my absolute favorites.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah. That was a World War II one. Yeah, those
yeah.
I mean, they're all great. Autumn Leaves is beautiful. Basically, just on the six songs we've mentioned that
Mm.
aren't in the show, you could do a whole show with those, and
Exactly. Yeah,
people would be
absolutely.
very happy.
Yeah.
So that was, so, but people say, how'd you pick the songs? And I'm like, I let the story
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
dictate
Yeah.
what songs were picked, and there's so many famous songs. Yeah, but Strangers in the Night's a great song.
Great, isn't it?
Yeah,
It's really good.
yeah,
Oh yeah.
yeah.
So yeah, well, with the song selection then, so you said you let the story dictate, but you said you really wanted some songs in anyway. So were there any others that you kind of just really kind of like kind of fought the narrative to get in?
Well, we wanted to put My Way in the show,
Yeah,
and My Way is a song sung by an older man looking back on his life.
yeah,
And Kathleen Marshall and I sat down, and then, some people were like, well, just at the end of the show, have him come out and sing. And I'm like, it's not that kind of show. And
yeah,
like,
yeah,
you don't want an actor spending 2 hours on stage. At the end of the night, he's got to, blast through My Way. His voice
yeah.
is going to be, eight times a week.
He'll lose his
So I'm
voice
like,
like Frank did.
yeah, right. And sing this icon, so I'm like, you just don't want to give that burden to anyone.
No.
That's one song that we figured out how to get it in a way that makes sense, that
Mhm.
stays a little bit outside of the story. No, but those were like literally High Hopes was a song I loved and I had in the script. At one point he sings a song with little Nancy, his who became Nancy Sinatra, the great pop star. And I thought they should sing High Hopes. And Tina said, "Oh, I think he really should sing the way you look tonight." And
Mm.
I was like, "Oh, that's good too." So we tried that and it works great. But I'm like, I love High Hopes.
Yeah.
It seems like such a good little kid song. But as I said, Summer Wind. I couldn't get Cycles in there. Those were sort of the bigger ones, but there's, I'm sure I'll remember more because he had so many songs and so many of them are great, and a lot of them are about pain and loss and love.
Yeah.
So there's also a point where I was looking for songs, like a song, "I'm Gonna Live Till I Die"
Yeah. I
is a
love
great
that song.
song.
I
Isn't that
love
great?
that
Not a
song.
lot of people
Yeah.
know it,
Yeah.
but I needed an upbeat song for the
Yeah.
second act when he's on his comeback and he's
Yeah.
feeling good. So
Yeah.
that's in the show. And it's interesting, Joel Harper Jackson, um, he sings the second half of that song in the
Mm.
show, and he's sort of off doing a costume change while the ensemble's singing the first half. And when I see him in rehearsal, he'd be off to the side and he'd be singing along. And I'm like, like off stage, I'm like, you don't have to sing that.
You can
Like,
stop.
you can stop because I love this song so much. I love singing it. So he was, yeah. So yeah. So it was really, once I knew I had enough big songs, I was trying to find a couple of other songs
Mhm.
to fill in the uh, uh, just fill in the gaps of the story,
Yeah.
to make sure all the songs weren't ballad. It's to be easy for this show to be all ballads and
Yeah.
all songs of longing.
And with the songs that you chose, you utilized kind of Sinatra's full catalogue. And obviously the show is set in a certain period of his career. What was the decision there with including ones that, were released later?
My decision was literally when we had decided that I'm gonna do the this time period. I said, look, we really know Sinatra from the Nelson Riddle like recordings. That's what's
Yeah.
our knowledge of him. "I'll Never Smile Again" is a great song, but that's a
But
song from the '40s, and
yeah,
that's not
yeah.
going to be, the crowds are not going to be happy if they
Yeah,
come in.
yeah.
And he just sings "I'll Never Smile Again."
Yeah.
So, so I said, here's my theory. These songs, Frank so embodied songs that these songs were always within him. They're
Yeah.
always inside him. So
Yeah.
these songs are always inside him, and they're just in our narrative coming out earlier. And we're not writing a show in 1953. We're writing a show in 2026. So we need modern ears looking back on his life. So that was my theory, and that sort of informed. That gave me the option to really put any song
Yeah.
I wanted.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You mentioned Joel Harper Jackson, and obviously he replaced Matt Doyle as Sinatra. Following that change, was there any, did it lead to any other further changes in the production? Were any more informed by kind of Joel Harper Jackson's presence?
Joel is like I had heard of Joel as like a great dramatic actor,
Mm.
being an American, and I know he had replaced the actor who dropped out of the play Cock. And I know when we were rehearsing and I saw people auditioning, when I saw the list, I
Mm.
said, "Oh yeah, I didn't really even knew he sang maybe," and I was like, "Oh, but I knew." And my British friends, I was like, "Oh my God, he's a great singer too." So like, "Oh okay," and then we wanted to cast a Brit if we could find one. So we came here to audition and saw some great people with great credits. Kathleen Marshall and I don't really know the talent pool over there, obviously, as well as we know in America. So we were just like, everyone's got to come in,
Yeah.
and we're really open-minded because, then I got calls from friends. Oh, that you should look at this person and this person. I'm like, great. And very talented young men came in, and Joel walked into the audition room. He sort of swaggered up to the table with great confidence, which he said was all an act, but he swaggered up like Frank,
Yeah, trying to
and
do Frank's mafia persona.
he just had this like masculine
Yeah,
confidence.
yeah,
It wasn't arrogant. It was just like, hey, I'm here to do this job. He had a skinny tie on,
yeah.
and he just he sang first, and I was like, "Oh, he's not. Not only can he sing, he's a real singer."
Mm.
And he was like, "Great!" And then he started acting the scenes, and as the writer, and this is a real book musical. I mean, there are real scenes. Frank goes through it, and he dug deep in those scenes. And I was sitting next to Tina Sinatra, who grabbed my hand, like she was
Wow.
so like she started getting emotional, and
Oh
I'm
wow.
like, this is the guy. And then
Yeah,
at certain angles that he sort of looked like Frank,
yeah, yeah.
I like the angular faces, and it was just one of those auditions that's really memorable. And I think he came in like for the first round and was for just me and Kathleen, and we were
Mm.
like, oh, I hope Tina and the producers love him because
Yeah,
he's the guy. And
yeah.
then he came in, and there was no question. It was just one of those auditions where like it's the right actor at the right point in his career playing the right role where he's the right age,
Mm.
has the right, dramatic abilities, can sing it, yeah, no problem. So it was just that. And then he's been a great, not only is he a great, person to rehearse with, but he's a great company leader. He really is, I always say the lead actor in your show or
Mm.
actress sets the tone
Yeah.
backstage, and he really did because he's an extremely hard worker. He will, like all great actors do, ask me question after question about why am I saying this?
Mm.
Can he say that? All of that, and we'll have long discussions, and then we'll come to a decision. And go okay, and yeah. So he's been really just a joy to work with, and you'll see him. I just think he's spectacular on stage in a really massive role.
Mm.
Massive role where there's an old writing thing. It's like take your protagonist and throw as much shit at him as you can, and let him figure it out. And
Yeah.
we throw it all at Frank, and he comes out on top. And Joel knows how to embody that.
In terms of the score, compared to Memphis, where it was kind of an original score,
Yeah.
how does that compare? Working with a fixed catalog, does it feel freeing in a way or confining in some ways? And did you consider an original score or a semi-original score for Sinatra?
No, no one ever. No, I think the semi-original score. It's funny, even on Memphis, and that was my first commission, I think.
Mm.
When we did that, the producer was like, "Well, we'll do a half an original score and half
Mm.
songs from that era, which you could easily do."
Mm.
But the problem with that, which I even knew then, I was like, no composer worth their salt wants to do half a score,
Yeah.
especially when the other half are famous songs,
Yeah.
right? Like
Yeah.
you don't want to
Yeah.
write no one wants to write a score and then my way and that's life is in the song. It's just going to be
It's
like what are
pale in
these songs that you
comparison
came up with?
completely.
Yeah,
Yeah.
like unless you get so no, it was never considered, and I just thought we're telling the story of Frank, and Frank famously said, if I can't feel it, I can't sing it. So he
Mm.
felt all of these songs.
Mm.
So it was fairly easy. I wouldn't say easy, but I could always find a song that expressed the emotion that he was going through, especially when it dealt with relationships, especially like Ava Gardner, I've Got You Under My Skin. That's exactly what happened to him.
Yeah.
She was just an addiction
Yeah.
almost. So, that was just like you know, you're done when I had that. But look, I love both. I love working on found things because it's a challenge to fit them all in, and you almost have to write backwards, I say, because you
Mm.
have the song, so you're like, okay,
Yeah.
and this was a little combination of both because the story was taking me in one direction that I couldn't veer from, because it was real life. But the songs I had to fit in, so that was a challenge. But when you write an original score, the thing is you're just saying, okay, this is the story,
Yeah.
probably. Now, what can, and then you have to write a great song, and then
Yeah.
oftentimes there's always a point in an original musical where there's one or two songs you just can never quite get, and sometimes they make it on stage, but sometimes you just rewrite it four or five times before you get it. So, but
Yeah.
this one was also like, look, I had high hopes for a great little cute duet with his daughter, but someone's Tina suggested The Way You Look Tonight. I was like, well, that's maybe a better song and fits just as well.
Yeah.
So yeah,
I could
that's good.
with like
Yeah,
Frank songs and stuff. I whenever I listen to the instrumental and the way he sings so cinematic, I just when I listen to them myself, I am imagining. I get
yeah,
such visual elements. So I some of them sound like the end of a production that hasn't been made. You know what I mean?
right. Yeah, no, he
It's
was amazing. I mean, he
yeah.
really did. Who knows how he did it, but he did it. Yeah.
Yeah. When you kind of hand over the final copy to the director and the cast, how
Mhm.
does that feel and how involved do you remain from that point on? Do you adapt as you go along if there's kind of things to iron out that you only realize in full production, or are you kind of ready to
Yeah,
let it
well,
go?
I honestly didn't hand over the final copy to the cast and Kathleen, our director, till this past Thursday.
Oh wow.
So yeah, we
Yeah.
literally this last past week were tweaks, but no, I believe I love writing and I love rewriting, and I believe theater is almost like having a living canvas that you're
Yeah.
painting on.
Yeah.
And so in rehearsals, we did a lot of work because actors are asking questions. We're seeing how scenes juxtapose. Every once in a while, Kathleen will be like, "Can you give me 10 more seconds in this scene because someone's off, because I got to get the set on, or
Yeah.
someone has to
Yeah.
have a drink of water or change their suit." So there's a little bit of that. But, we put the show up in front of an audience 3.5 weeks ago now, maybe. And it landed the first night, but I looked at it and Kathleen looked at it, and I was like, you know what? The first act is too long. It was, I think, an hour and 15 minutes, and now it's an hour five.
Mm.
So we spent 2 weeks just like cutting it to get to the heart of the story. And the first act is always exposition, right? Because you're
Yeah. Yeah.
establishing the story, and then the second act, all the elements come together,
Yeah. And climax
um,
and
and climax. Yeah, so that was always an hour long. But I still tweaked, and there's like sometimes write a better joke there because the audience is not laughing, and sometimes this scene goes on two beats too many,
mm.
or sometimes an actor will say to me, she's talking about this here, but this is what I'm thinking about as an actor. And so
Yeah.
sometimes I'll be like, oh, but it's good because there's subtext here in what you're
Yeah.
saying, or sometimes like, you're right, let me try another line. So we tried things out in uh, 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 previews, and yeah, as I said, it was 3 or 4 days ago we were like, okay, now it's settled, it's working great. The first act zips along as much as the second, and we're telling the story we want to tell in a focused way, and you could tell audiences are responding. um, the tighter and more focused the show got, the audience response even got better and better.
Mm.
So the audience is always the your final collaborator. And I think if you're I don't want to say smart writer, but I know some writers don't like to change anything. I
Yeah.
always Actors always tell that, but I like love it because I sit amongst the audience, I listen to them, I can tell if they get fidgety, I can tell if they're confused. So we spent the last 3 weeks working hard, and I think we're very happy with what we have on the stage now at the Aldwych.
It sounds like that'd be very rewarding as well to kind of have this living canvas. I think I'd prefer that as a writer, to
Yeah.
be able to,
Like, yeah, why, yeah, yeah, I always say you're always better off having a great 2 hour show than a pretty good 2 hour and 15-minute show,
yeah,
right?
sure,
You're always
exactly.
better. And the actors, sometimes they lose a couple lines they love, and
Yeah,
sometimes they'll fight for it, but I'm always like, in the
yeah,
long run, Kathleen and I are seeing the whole of the evening, and you're in it.
yeah,
So trust me, this line, use it as your backstory. The
yeah,
audience doesn't need to hear it, and we're making them think about something for a moment that takes them out of our main story.
yeah.
Yeah.